Speaker says we are about to begin. Personally, I sat surrounded by unique people, and Ludmila Alexeeva in the first place, who is a very dear and much loved person in my biography, both now and in the past. And on my right there is Vladimir Vainovich, who I don't think I have to introduce. You all know that writer, and it's the first time for him to attend our class, and I'm overfilled with joy because of that, I think, together with you. Starting the Ludmila Alexeeva session, I would like that class to meet her, since everything she has been doing in her life, and I hate speaking in very pompous terms, but I think she lives the life, the civil life, the way it should be. Ludmila thinks that we have much of civil society here, but I think that civil society are the people who support that society, because civil society is a symbol telling us how to live and behave with dignity, and not jeopardizing dignity of other people. Civil life is an opportunity to fill with freedom, but freedom which is responsible. We can enjoy as much freedom as we can be responsible for. And this particular fact means that you do not only enjoy that freedom, but you do something to promote freedom. You help other people get freedom and be free. But for Ludmila, it's her routine, everyday life. There are some human things that cannot be done yesterday. It's something that you have to do on a daily basis, since it's reproduced. Those freedoms are reproduced on a daily basis through your own effort, and very few people can help you in that endeavor. And she belongs to the generation of the people who, in the Soviet Union, in remote years of 1950s and 1960s, declared suddenly that they understood what human rights were, and they said that we had to stick and adhere to the Constitution. And it was a great surprise and shock for the power, for the authorities. So they tried to oppose those free thinking, and began imprisoning people for their thoughts, or putting them into asylums, and others were sent in exile. And immigration is really an exile, because those people are needed here. They are so designed that they can most fruitfully live and work only in the country they were born. Ludmila, when she came back from her exile, and she did it immediately when that opportunity arose, and first, you know that she headed the Helsinki group, and you know that Ludmila reminded your current generation of how you should behave and act. And in today's Russia, she was the first to lead thousands of people to rallies and demonstrations. There is a colleague of ours, Georgi, and we were riding in Moscow and saw armored personnel carriers in the Tverskaya street. And Georgi told me that there would be a rally, and Ludmila Alexeeva will lead that rally at the monument to Mayakovsky. And so it triggered a wave of protest. But Ludmila was the first to demonstrate that there were some methods, perhaps not political ones, but aesthetic ones, with those methods that you could use to protect people when their freedoms and dignity are grossly violated. I may not go in to speak long, but I would like to tell all of you that she served a unique example to us, how you can live your life. That particular example cannot be replicated, but it's very inspiring and encouraging, at least for those who work here at the school every day. Thank you. Today I'm going to speak of the following topic. What are human rights activists? I guess most of you know who or what they are, but you have your own idea about them. And I'm going to tell you the way I view and I see them. Perhaps we have a lot in common in our definitions. So what are the human rights activists, human rights workers? Those are the people who believe that their life is designed to protect human rights of every individual, to protect them from any infringements on the part of the state or state officials. It's very important, because when the state power try to infringe on those rights, somebody has to protect them. If there are people who are in disagreement over something, it's not the duty of human rights workers to resolve their problems. But if those problems arise between the state and the citizens, the fundamental terms and conditions are not equal to either party, and human rights workers are supposed to defend and protect those citizens whose rights are infringed on by the state or officials. In what way can human rights workers protect citizens from the state and officials? Because human rights activists are the same people as you are. They do not enjoy any authority, and they have similar capabilities as everybody has. But unlike many other people, human rights activists do know what people have rights, and they know how those rights can be protected. So they try to use all the means that they are entitled to by the law to protect those rights. Just some example. So somebody goes to the armed forces as a conscript. Unfortunately, it's not only the armed forces, but our laws are designed in such a way that a soldier cannot protect himself individually. And that's the reason why all around the country we saw the emergence of soldier mothers committees. And unlike soldiers, mothers are not enlisted officers or personnel, and they can protect their soldiers whose rights are violated in the armed forces. But not all the mothers know how to do that. And those who know, they come to the committees and to work in the soldier mothers committees and start protecting not only their sons, but all those who serve in the army and need that help. Following the end of the conscription term, retired soldiers and their sons return home, most of the mothers stop working for the committees, but some of them stay. And they started working in the committees when their sons were in the army. And they felt that this particular endeavor is very important. And their civil activities gave him another meaning of their life. And no matter if their sons are retired or not, they keep on working for the soldiers' mothers' committees. And those committees began emerging at the very beginning of the perestroika, and they are still operating. And they have some mothers who have been working in those committees since the early days of those activities, and they have saved hundreds, if not thousands, of soldiers from violence, and they virtually saved lives of those soldiers. And now they have a new meaning of their life, because they take care not only of their sons, but being part of such committees, they are helping and they are saving lives of many other soldiers. I can think of Valentina Melnikova and Ida Kuklina in Moscow, and Ella Polakova works in St. Petersburg. But that does not exhaust the list. We have same mothers in most of the regions. They started being middle-aged women. Now they are quite old women, but they have evolved as professionals, and their work is very efficient. And the reason is that they are knowledgeable not only of the constitution of the country, but in the military area, they know all relative laws and rules. They know the organizations they have to turn to. They know how to speak to the military, to senior officers in the military. So the contributions are very useful, and we have same people not only in the soldier mothers committees, but they work in the social sphere. They work for children who need help, and in many other areas. I can think of Svetlana Ganushkina, who is the head of the Civil Dignity group, and she deals with migrants' rights, the segment of the society that enjoys very few rights. Back in 1989, the organization was set up, and the lady has been working in that area for all those years, although originally she was a teacher of math in a university. She is a retired person now, and still she is very active in that social area. She was awarded a number of prestigious international prizes, since her activities, her contributions are well known throughout the world. In the city of Nizhny Novgorod, there is Igor Kalapin, who heads the Committee Against Torture. He used to be a businessman, and he was taken into custody by police who wanted just to take his business away from him. And he saw very hard times because he was humiliated, he was tortured. When he managed to leave that custody, he didn't forget about those tortures and humiliation, and he took a distant learning course of a legal university, law school, in fact, and he invited professional lawyers, and so they set up the anti-torture committee. Many years have passed since then, and it's also a world-known organization. And he faces very high barriers, and because, to punish a law enforcement officer, those who have committed crimes, it's, next to impossible in this country to sue such officers, because the office of a prosecutor just covers those mischiefs of the police and those who work in the penitentiary system, even if they see that those people are guilty and they violated a lot of laws. And in many instances, in order to maintain, to establish justice and make those who are guilty be accountable for what they have done, they have to work the single case for many years, because the office of the prosecutor can close those cases, but they have to reapply again. And for that end, you need not only professional lawyers, but the lawyers with very high professionalism and experience. And this anti-torture committee in Nizhny Novgorod, they opened their branches in other Russian regions. They worked in Chechnya at some point, and they made a great contribution. And thanks to their efforts, the situation has changed. And now it's much easier to put that criminal law enforcement officer to justice than it used to be before, and it's thanks to their contribution. What are the opportunities to protect people from abuses of officials? Besides going to court, one of the very radical means is to make all those cases public. And I think that's the main instrument that human rights activists have. And in this country, human rights movement started from that particular those methods, and it started even in the Soviet Union. And so media at that time had inaccessible to us, and we couldn't place a single article in a newspaper because the censorship was total. And so in order to make those cases public, we used what we called samizdat, that is self-printed stories. So we typed actually all those stories on the typewriter, and did it in secrecy, because if we were caught, we would be punished very severely. You can understand that we couldn't print a lot of copies, so it was a limited means to make those cases public. But at that time it worked, because those who read those typed pages, they understood how important it was. And thanks to samizdat, to typing those cases, perhaps not gradually, but the numbers of human rights workers were growing. Those people who try to protect not only their own rights, but those of their compatriots too. So at first, making violations public was the best means, even to increase the number of human rights workers. And in 1990s, following the collapse of the Soviet Union, there was a period of time when we suddenly saw that there were no constraints for making things public, both orally or in writing. And because of that, we saw actually a very fast enhancement of the movement. More and more people saw how people were suffered from the lack of their rights. And we began knowing about those things much more than we used to know in the Soviet Union. And I should say that even in the 2000s, that openness stopped and publicity stopped. So most efficient means for disseminating knowledge were no longer at our disposal. I mean, those nationwide TV channels, they stopped covering events related to human rights violations. But in 1990s, the human rights movement was already quite mature. In the Soviet Union, there was just a small closed community in Moscow who dealt with human rights. In other Soviet cities, there were some individuals who tried to do the same, but as a community, as a group, it existed only in Moscow, and there were not many people, not perhaps several dozens of people only. And the numbers of the community were shrinking, since some people were imprisoned or put into lunatic asylums or exiled. But still, that human rights community existed, and new people came. It was small, but the power couldn't destroy it totally. And a question arises, if the level of human rights violations has reduced if compared with the Soviet Union. And you know, it's hard to answer that question. Earlier, before, we were not very much knowledgeable. We were aware of political repressions or purges. We knew about the lack of rights of collective farmers. So those were the facts that made up the tip of an iceberg. But we didn't know much about everyday's violations, because there was a total censorship, and people themselves didn't rise to protect their rights often. And in reality, the Soviet people just didn't know that they had rights that are invincible from any state offense. And officials treated them as second-rated people. They pressured them, they oppressed them, and ignored their interests, and that was normal. It had been the same throughout the times of the Soviet Union and those of the Russian Empire. and it went without saying. Many people took it for granted that people lived for the state, and the state can do with them whatever it wanted to, just to kill, to take all the belongings, assets from those persons. So we suspected that the human rights violations were massive in the Soviet Union, but we didn't know much. That's why it's very hard to draw a parallel between the human rights situation in the Soviet Union and now. In 1947, the United Nations adopted the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, and the declaration resulted from the very bitter experience of the mankind, the experience of 2 world wars in the 20th century. The wars that took away dozens of millions of human lives. And the Second World War was even bloodier than the first one. And you can understand that the best minds of the mankind and customary people raise the question, what is to be done so those total world wars wouldn't happen again. And the solution was sought in depriving states of their absolute power over men. So it shouldn't be the situation when people were meant for the state, but the opposite. And it was suggested that starting from the very birth, people had rights for life, for dignity, for respect, and no state has a right, is authorized to neglect and ignore those values.
The Soviet Union signed this declaration, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, together with other member states. The Soviet Union sought a way to appear civilized. However, the ideology of the Universal Declaration was quite alien to the official Soviet ideology. It contradicted the lifestyle and the fundamentals of the Soviet society, including but not limited to the format of the relations of the Soviet government and its deputies to the citizens of this country. The human rights activists thus found themselves out of the ambit of the law because while they did not share these principles, their actions were regarded as an attempt to undermine the fundamentals of the Soviet state. The human rights activists were tried in the Soviet courts according to the Criminal Code article on the anti-Soviet propaganda. In the Soviet time, we called ourselves human rights activists, but we were not human rights champions, because the human rights champions must protect their fellow citizens, whereas we could not protect ourselves. The state repudiated us, rejected us, did not want to be involved with us in any other way but the criminal litigation. So the only thing that the human rights activists did in the Soviet times is that they gave publicity to the crimes of the Soviet regime and persuaded the world public that a human may and must be protected and respected by its state, and the state must sit to the table with these with its own citizens. It was easier to publicize these events. Today, this task is, of course, not as difficult as it was. Yes, indeed, we're not led to talk on the federal channels, on the TV, but there is the cable TV. There are the independent radio stations. There are independent newspapers and journals. Finally, there is the internet. One can publish a blog, or conduct a blog, or publish on the website. And one has to say that today we are truly human rights activists. We're champions of human rights, even though it is difficult, but it is still possible. In the 1990s, we had more opportunities. Now these opportunities have significantly narrowed, but they still exist. Almost all human rights organizations have their reception offices, and people are consulted on how to try and defend their rights. And if people cannot do it, the human rights activist can try to help them. There are also the human rights schools. By educating the general public and at the same time recruiting the future human rights champions to their ranks. And this serves the purpose of at least telling the people that they can uphold their rights. There are schools for the professional lawyers. There are schools for the young people. So the human rights activists not only defend human rights, but also educate the population. In the world's democratic countries, there's a wide practice of the civic control over the actions of the state institutions. So it was about the adoption of the law on the public control in the penitentiary institutions. It took 11 years for this law to have been adopted, but in 2009 it was finally passed. This is the only sphere of societal life where there is the legal guarantee for civic control, and such commissions work, which are made up of human rights activists and champions. They can come to the inmates and then write reports concerning the violations. However, this is the only little sign of the public control in this vast country and societal fields. There is indeed the civic or public chamber and the civic councils under different ministries. However, this is more of an imitation of civic control. I myself am a member of the of the Ministry of Interiors or the police civic chamber or council, but other than the pompous meetings, there's hardly anything else that takes place there in substantial terms. So in spite of some of the great difficulties that the human rights champions encounter, in Russia we are facing a problem that did not exist in the Soviet times, which is the relationships between the human rights activists and the government. On the one hand, the human rights activists have to confront it because the human rights are violated, and on the other hand, there has to be an interaction to redress the wrongs. In the Soviet Union, this did not exist, as the government did not allow for any possibility to any objection or criticism. The Russian constitution of today is built on the universalist principles, whereby the multi-ethnic or the multinational people of Russia is the source of authority, unlike the Soviet constitution, which postulated the leading role of the Communist Party. You also know that the State Duma today is and has been adopting laws with great zeal, which seem to, or definitely are, in contradiction to the Constitution, to its spirit and letter, and these new laws have made or curtailed the rights proclaimed by the Constitution, so that many of them have indeed become fictitious. However, the 20 years that have elapsed after the breakup of the Soviet Union have not passed in vain. Nowadays, most citizens know their rights, and many have even learned to stand their ground. And the human rights community has also grown manifold. So in all major cities and towns of Russia, there are human rights organizations or human rights watches. So today in Russia, the government may not be so categorical and totally oppressive towards the human rights activists as it was in the Soviet Union. However, in their rhetoric, they're not against human rights activism, which creates a certain possibility for a dialogue. And the human rights activists indeed need this kind of counterparty. Let us take a very simple example. A pensioner was paid less than his or her pension must be. That person goes to the human rights organization. What do? You cannot just talk to him and tell him, oh, we're sorry that you were not paid the requisite amount. No, you have to go to the Ministry of Social Affairs, and you have to talk to the bureaucrat. You have to talk to the civil servant and explain and persuade that particular bureaucrat that this particular pensioner must have or get more in payment. So the same concerns the elections. If we limit ourselves to telling each other look at these scoundrels, this will not change anything. You have to interact with the government, however unpleasant this might be at times, and we continue to work in this sphere through publicizing. Publicizing is our most important instrument, but we cannot limit ourselves to that. We have to work for restoring the rights of every citizen. Publicizing is a very important thing. If you stop doing that, if you stop surfacing such violations because you do not want to make foes with a particular state official, this won't work. This won't do. How shall we be different from the mere mendicants or beggars? We have to be able to combine the open criticism for violation of human rights with the actual work on interacting with the government to redress the wrongs. And the only if you can make this balance, you can say that yes, I'm efficient, yes, I can protect the human rights, and at the same time make it clear that the system has violated them. Let me also say in the end about the main problem of our human rights organizations of today. On January the 1st of 2013, the anti-constitutional and false law about the NGOs was adopted. This relates not only to the Human Rights Watch, but also to them. So, in accordance with that law, the organizations which are receiving the funds and dealing in the civil sphere must register as foreign agents. A part of the human rights organizations do receive foreign grants. Why is that the case? This is the case because the state, the human rights organizations, can hardly get or hope for financing. The state would hardly be prepared or willing to finance an organization which speaks about the violation by the state of its own legislation or laws. We have many rich people in this country who have their foundations, but we do not have independent business. And every businessman, every entrepreneur in this country understands that if he or she finance the oppositionary organizations, this would reflect or affect their businesses. Everybody remembers the case of Yugos. But even if an organization gets money from abroad, there has to be one other condition for it to be called a foreign agent, which is dealing with politics or political activities. And it appears that the human rights champions must not be in that league because the human rights activists do not engage in politics. What is political activity? What is it? Engagement with politics or political activity means seeking power or participating in the political life for the purposes of gaining power or influence. The Human Rights Watch organizations and activists are not seeking power. But this law, and it is exactly that is the reason why it is anti-constitutional, it has a most strange and idiosyncratic definition of politics, which is influence on the public opinion. And indeed, this is what the human rights activists have always been dealing with, which is influencing the public opinion, appealing to the society with respect to the violation of the human rights on the part of the government and its officials. So, this law is it's fundamentally anti-constitutional because the Constitution stipulates that every person has the right for association. And the Constitution also has an article which bans the State Duma from adopting laws which curtail the rights stipulated by the Constitution. So this is about falsifying none of these organizations has ever participated in the political activities supporting any of the candidates, and the elections monitoring organizations have never in any way participated in the actual electoral campaign. So, Golos, this organization, has declined the foreign grants. So the first condition of this law should not have been applied to this organization. And yet again, they do not deal with the politics, because elections monitoring is not about politics. However, Golos was called a foreign agent. And the same happened with respect to Kostroma organization, which didn't have neither foreign grants, and they were also called a foreign agent, or defined as foreign agent, which is indeed the actual purpose of this law, to repress the civil activities, to liquidate the civic organizations which are a thorn in the back of the authorities. What can I say? In the Soviet times, the government was putting people in jail, taking them to psychiatric institutions, and banishing them abroad. The Soviet Union collapsed over 20 years ago. The human rights movement spread across the entire country, and I may say that once such a society originated, it will continue to develop. And even though it is still small, and the government is not in any way ashamed, I am still positive and optimistic about this civil society. Thank you. Colleagues, we have about 40 minutes for questions and answers. Let us start with you, Ms. Blaženko. Kenich Blashenko, human rights from Bosnia. I was a human rights activist for 4 years before I first came to Moscow. Do you not believe that the human rights activist in this country has a somewhat negative connotation? Partially, maybe because the United States and the Western countries are regarded, or maybe regarded, as an instrument, or at least some in Russia say that they use human rights rhetoric as a matter of political propaganda. And my first question. And my second question, could you recommend any human rights organization that I could work as a volunteer? I was seeking such organization, but I was not particularly successful. Of course, and I mentioned that in the rhetoric, they, and even lately the Russian president spoke and had some nice words to say about the civil society. But if you judge by the actual actions and not the words, you'll see that the officials in this country at all levels still treat people as a rebel, and such things are not to be easily discarded. I think that the economics change much more swiftly than the actual mentality, and it is the bureaucracy which is the greatest foe. Most of the officials believe that the life is for them, and they don't even think if you analyze the laws that have been adopted by the Duma over the past year, you'll notice that most of these have been announced and adopted exactly for the purpose to govern easier, to govern the people. And how can they govern but after the examples well developed in the Soviet times, to defame, to deceive, and to provocate. And partnership is such an empty thing for them. Unfortunately, the citizens and the human rights activists have to work and live under this environment. Unfortunately, there is no, in this country, a tradition for a respect for humans, and this respect is something that needs to be cultivated. No, they're our citizens, and we are fellow citizens. No, it may be unfortunate, but it is the case. Sometimes we just have to get to where we are, and we have to stand our ground. With respect to your question as to what organizations could be recommended, there are quite a few organizations that have their schools, but in 2013 and 2014, many human rights organizations have curtailed or indeed suspended their educational programs. For instance, the Moscow-Helsinki group, of which I am the chairman, used to have the summer and winter schools for human rights. We had to decline and to stop these schools because we had to pay for the tickets, and this was quite costly to finance these schools. And so we had to suspend these educational programs. And we just don't have the money for it. They were coming from the foreign grants. And it's not just about the Moscow-Helsinki group. There are less and less schools nowadays. For instance, we have moved our human rights activism in 2003 to 13 to Kiev, in the hope that the visa-free regime and the human rights colleagues in the Ukraine. But now, of course, in this situation, Kiev is not the place to go. So it is very hard to recommend. So just go online and try to find what organizations could still be there. Anton from St. Petersburg. Anton Petrov from St. Petersburg. I have in my biography an episode with human rights activism. The officials or the bureaucrats may say to you, you are upholding the rights of the soldiers or the privates, but who will uphold the rights of the officers? And indeed, I have encountered cases when an officer in the army was put in jail because he abused of his power. And there is a problem that the officers may not influence in any way. And there is a problem whereby that the officers in the army are not a lot more privileged than the privates. And they may well be quite powerless. Tamara Georgievna Morshakova spoke before us yesterday with respect to the legal system and said that one of the major motives was that the judges in this country are probably as unprotected as the defendants themselves, and this is something that you see in many fields in Russia.
Actually, we deal with the rights of all humans. I just mentioned the committee of the soldiers' mother, but we deal with officers as well. They also have their own problems, and their rights are violated. And our army is a pen of slavery, and it is felt by soldiers and their commanders as well. You can humiliate a person, shout at him, and nobody resists. There are problems among the officers who retire and those who work to get housing, and their rights are violated, and we defend these officers. This is just an example. it is not only, again, officers, our officials are also citizens of the same society, and among them there are many of those against whom we have to stand because they abuse their rights, to violate other citizens' rights. And they also feel unfairness sometimes, and in this case we defend them as well. We have to learn to treat people not depending on what they are, but on how they behave. There are officials or clerks who are quite honest and who do their best to do something for others, and they suffer from their own bosses, colleagues. And sometimes there is a criminal liability for doing your job honestly. I don't think I have to give you details, so you should treat people not because of what they are again, but because of how they behave in the society. And if a clerk or an official is honest, you have to cherish him and help him. Ludmila Mikhailovna, my question, in the atmosphere of lie which surrounds us now, I think that our society was substituted. The society of the Russians in the 90s was more progressive, believed that you could live under market economy or under democracy, but within the last 10 years it seems that we are changed. Nobody believes into anything, nobody believes in competition, in the right to live properly, and there were swings of public moods in your lifetime. What should happen for our people to wake up and feel citizens and not just consumers, let's put it this way? Such people are there, of course, and I think that among those present there are not so few of them, I would say many. But frankly speaking, quite recently I thought that we have more real citizens. I was shaken by the attitude of the majority of our compatriots towards the events in the Ukraine. From my point of view, we have done there an indecent thing. Our neighbor is in trouble. They change the authority, the state becomes weaker. What shall we do to give a helping hand, to assist? And what have we done? They are weak and let us steal away the Crimea or and something else. What is this? This is not policy. This is the issue of decency, of whether we are people. And what was done from the top? Well, that does not surprise me. But I'm surprised by something else, that our compatriots in the majority supported our authorities. You can use the weakness of your neighbor, and instead of helping him, rob him. and think that this is quite good. I agree with you. Unfortunately, there is an empire syndrome. Russia was always an empire before or after the revolution. We were accustomed to be strong and to frighten others. But we have to deserve sympathy and respect. The empire syndrome is hard to eradicate, even in case of regular citizens. And of course, in case of officials who feel themselves superior, it's even more difficult. So these 20-something years were not enough to turn the majority of our citizens into people who liberated themselves from this syndrome. It takes time. You have to work with it, same as you work with human rights, and just behave humanly yourself, be decent, and be human under any circumstances. This should be a task for everybody, and if you fulfill this task, will bring closer the time when you will be able to say that our country is a civilized part of the community, of the society. I am actually very much upset about all this. On behalf of our organization and many others present here, I want to ask you personally, because we've had here Mikhail Fedotov. Lukin was supposed to come here because he mixed things up and he's somewhere away. But the situation now is even more complicated than it was a year ago in relation of NGO situation. It's not about money, because we pay all our taxes, but it's about an independent activity. On Monday, a check from the Department of Justice is coming to us to register us forcefully, I understand. Can you talk to our president, who listens to you once in a while, or at least he claims to listen to you? Maybe he doesn't hear you, he doesn't listen to you, but he hears you. Maybe you should inform him about what happens at the grassroots level. It seems to me that everybody in his place reaches limits when people lose common sense. I don't believe in ties or connections, but I believe that institutions are important. But so far, our society is such that you should ask the president to allow him to pay you a visit.
Сейчас мы проводим такую целую серию консультаций.
We hold a number of consultations now with organizations touched upon directly by all this and with others which are
Ну, и ощущение непосредственности его но
so far is not yet threatened,
ряд этих
but
есть дальше. Мы сейчас проводим
they require our advice as well.
стараюсь выработать свою тактику и стратегию.
But we try to develop our tactics and strategy under the circumstances.
Вы знаете, наверное, среди прочих действий должно быть и
Among other acts, there should be direct address to the president.
вы правы в том смысле, что,
And you are right.
наверное, если кто-то решат, что это нужно делать, то
Saying
это делать мне,
if
все-таки я уже
something should be done like that, so probably it should be me who do it, because next year I've been involved with this hopeless activity for 50 years. And if for 50 years you haven't achieved something, you are an idiot. I don't consider myself an idiot.
если говорить о моем собственном ощущении,
Speaking about my own feelings,
то я думаю, что на мое обращение
I think that to my address,
я получу,
I
может быть, даже какие-то осторожные заявления.
will get some probably cautious assurances saying that all unfairnesses will be dealt with, some foolish people made some mistakes, but what actions would follow, I don't know. Because more than once I dealt with the situation when a person says one thing and does another. Ours is a very surprising country because the authority of the president is so enormous, in line with our laws and constitution. And he concentrated great power in his hands. Well, there is a guy named Andrei Chernikov who 7 years ago started fighting being a municipal deputy in Kuzminki in Moscow. He started fighting with his municipal corruptioners. They sold land for garages without any right. So they received enormous money. They did that throughout Moscow, not only in Kuzminki. So people who bought these garages would be thrown away. They would lose the land, but they wouldn't get back their money. And he spoke against this. These people started fighting him. There was a fight for 7 years, but this person for 2 years is in custody. Within these years, different people, including myself, 6 times addressed about him the president. 5 times to Mr. Putin and once to Medvedev. Each time they wrote wonderful resolutions, and I thought, all right, I helped this person. but it all fell through. It all disintegrated. But investigator invented that Chernikov rushed at him and wanted to strangle him while he was in jail. There were two witnesses who were other prisoners, and they testified in court that this was not the case, the both of them. So now another court is to take place, and he will go to jail for 8 years. I visited Patrushev for 7 years, you see. I paid many visits. We'll do it. We'll address the president, but Lena, dear, I don't know what will come out of it. Had I known that if I approach the president and it will be fine, I'll rush there like an arrow. Mr. Ovchinnikov. Sure. Ovchinnikov, St. Petersburg. You mentioned the address to the president.
Yes, you were saying that you have to appeal to the president to consult and counsel. Tell me, please, how can you comment such a sensitive situation in the country that in order to, if we want mercy on the person who was arrested by police, you have to seek presidential pardon and nothing happens? Exactly, what do you mean, what's my take on this? I may say, I don't like this country, I will leave it. For 13 years, I spent 13 years in America, and once I got a chance, I got back, because Americans were sure know how to do something in America without my involvement. But here, there's so much for me to do. What we need is patience, nothing doing, but there's only one way to follow. To work so that these people in this country should feel comfortable, should feel well, should have a good, comfortable and worthy life. That's what all of us are fighting for. I hope I'm not alone. No, it's not that I hope. I know that I'm sure of, because one person cannot change much, because this school, which has been around since 1990s, the early 1990s. I suppose first time I spoke here in 1992, could it be? Well, I've seen it many times, that people who studied at the school, something happens in their mind, and they become better, they become more sensible and more humane. And that's why you have to fight for this school. And this goes back to the 1990s. Well, Lena Mikhailovna, should I say, Lena Mikhailovna and Yuri Petrovich, they are friends of mine, and I can say that the school is what their life is about. They don't have any time left for anything else since the early 1990s. And some people just came by and coined the idea. And all this can go in vain, can perish. And we, all of us, each of us, can do what we can to make sure the school persists, and so that Elena Mikhailovna and Yuri Petrovich should continue to live this such a strange sort of life when they live mostly for the school, not live a life of their own. And we have quite a lot of people like this, and trust me, I've been doing it for 50 years now. I don't know to which extent, how many more people we now have like this, and how much more effective they've become. Certainly not very, very effective. Maybe I will not live to see the day when things will be, you know, like and super civilized. Or it's not that, probably, it's surely that I will not live to see this day when in this country things will be like in a super civilized state. But if you want to know, but I'm not upset about it, because each person will never live to see some day when something else happens. It's not important what we didn't see because we had died before that. The most important thing is why we lived our lives. And I do all I can so that my compatriots should live better, a better life. If each of us should, in the same way, each of us, each student of this school, in all these years, oh, think of it, how many. And in our private life and in the lives of our country, things will change for the better in this way. To be honest, I would think that after this final presentation, all the questions would be unneeded, dear colleagues. I don't know if you would agree with this or not. For me to speak at this school every time, it's a great feast for me because I can see people like you. Dear colleagues, I suppose there is nothing else I can add to it. I would like to add to what Lena said. The thing is that Lena Zimirovska is not just a great person. I think that Ludmila Alexeeva has turned into a social institution, and this is the case, this is true. Because no explanations are needed, probably, and much it depends upon this institution. Lena Mikhailna, my request for you personally, please stay around for longer. The party and the government will keep you busy. They don't want to correct their behavior. And we shall continue to love you and support you and help you in every way we can. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Well, together we shall continue to work together, and I would like to say once again, I just think I can't turn civic society. It seems okay they've put the pressure, too much pressure on us. Look, in Soviet times it seemed to us 100 times, where is the Soviet Union? It's not around, and we are here. Dear colleagues, now we invite Ludmila Mikhailna,
Фотографию. Вот здесь, вот перед зданием, на лужайке.
So we now should take a photo. So please join us at the lawn where they will take a picture. Thank you.